r/NoSleep. Posted by u/JJX. My parents aren't normal at night. For as long as I could remember, I never saw my parents at night. I never got a bedtime story or even a simple goodnight kiss from them. Don't get me wrong, they weren't bad parents and they loved me dearly, but I always sensed they were kinda off, to say the least. Growing up as an only child, I mostly played by myself or basically begged my parents to play with me. I didn't have any friends or get any human interaction since I was homeschooled, and we barely left the house in general. We basically lived in isolation. Our nearest neighbors were about 30 minutes away from us. Even till this day I don't know how my parents was able to afford the nice house we lived in. As I grew up, my parents made sure to drill this one rule into my head. Never open this door after 8:30. No matter what, this door stays locked and closed. My parents was very strict about this rule, especially my father, as my mother was more lenient with me when it came down to it. One incident I still remember clear as day. I was about 9 or 10 at the time. I was with my parents watching some dumb children's movie. As 8:30 rolled around, I was sent to my room, and right before I locked my door, I heard light thumps on the walls. I didn't think much of it, as the house would randomly make noises like that. After some time I tried falling asleep, but I found it hard. Tossing and turning around in my bed wasn't helping me either, as I laid in silence. Light scraping and muffled noises echoed out into the somewhat quiet house. Sitting up in my bed, I sat there for what felt like eternity. I gathered enough courage and walked toward my door. While walking toward my door, all the scraping and muffled noises suddenly stopped. As I got to my door, I placed my hand on the lock and slowly unlocked the door, and I slowly pushed it open. My nostrils were hit with a gut-wrenching smell I could only describe as stinky at the time. My eyes started to adjust to the darkened hallway. I stepped out into the hallway, but before I could walk further I bumped into something soft but firm. I slowly looked up, and looking back at me was my mother, but it wasn't her. Her skin was ghost white and it looked like she was a rotting corpse. Her face had a long black gash running down to her chest area, and her hands didn't seem normal either. As she held her arm, she held it so tight blood started rolling down. But whatever she was bleeding wasn't blood, it was black, almost like ink. Her clothes had big red splatters on the front of it, her hair looked dead and dried out. And her skin looked off, like it was a costume or some sort. As I looked back up at her, her facial expression changed drastically. It was like she was restraining herself from doing something. As I tried making up an excuse, she finally spoke. "Bed. Now." Her voice sounded all twisted and demonic. It sent chills down my spine, as she never did that before. I walked back into my room, and as she slammed my door, I could vividly remember sounds of tearing and quick footsteps running down the hallway. I've tried confronting my parents about this multiple times since then, but they always brushed it off as me having a nightmare, or they just completely changed the subject. Even after I reached into my teen years, I always thought it was just a surreal nightmare I had. Boy, was I wrong. I thought since I was getting older my parents would give me a bit more freedom and let me stay out of my room for a while longer. To say they were even more strict than before would be an understatement. Ever since the little hallway nightmare, my parents rearranged my lock so it would only lock from the outside. At the time I didn't have a problem with it since I was only a child. But as I grew into my teenage years I found it weird and a bit creepy they were so hell-bent on locking me in my room at night. Last week, I was out in the kitchen finishing up some last-minute book report I was assigned. My father slammed my laptop closed, almost hitting my fingers in the process. "Don't you see what time it is?" His voice was stern and firm as his presence shook me a little. As I turned around toward the living room clock and silently read out the time to myself. 8:35 the clock read as I slowly turned back toward my father. As I looked up at his face, he had the same facial expression my mother had when she caught me sneaking out years before, like he was restraining himself from doing something to me. His body was moving on its own, like something was inside of his skin as it was trying to get out. But before I could inspect further he pointed in the direction of my room with a stern manner. I made my way toward my room, and not even 6 seconds later I heard locks clicking as multiple footsteps walked away. I've tried sneaking out my room, but it proved no good as I tried pulling the door. Rattles of a chain bumped against my door. As I sat in the dark I made my toward my drawer and slowly grabbed a picklock I was saving. I never picklocked a door, so I stuck it in and moved it around for about 5 to 10 minutes. As I was about to give up I heard a small click and slowly opens the door, but was stopped by the small chain. As I started picking the chain lock, I could hear faint screaming and the same scraping I've been hearing for nearly half my life coming from the living room area. As the chain lock clicked, I carefully sat it down and stepped out into the hallway. Slowly making my way toward the living, the screams became a bit clear. I peeked around the corner and as I did, nothing was there. The living room was empty and quiet. As I came around the corner, I noticed a bright red door that was never there before. I slowly got closer to the door and a chill shot down my spine as the air got heavy and thick. More screams came from behind the door and the combo of curiosity and being scared got to me. I slowly crouched down and raised my eye toward the small keyhole, and what I saw sent chills down my spine. It was my parents. They were standing around a silver table. There was red and black liquid splattered all over the place. As I scanned the room, the muffled screams started again. I looked back at the table and saw a pair of feet covered in red liquid struggling and wiggling around. As my mother walked in front of the table, something I can't forget happened. My mother placed her hands on her face and ripped it completely off. A bony dark humanoid emerged from my mother's skin. The creature's arms were long and disoriented, and its hands were long and sharp. As my father removed his skin and revealed a taller humanoid with bigger teeth and claws. The sounds of scraping were them torturing people. The screams kept going and the person struggled as the sight of my parents removing their skin scared him more. The creature walked slowly toward the man and placed one of its dark sharp claws over his mouth before stabbing him repeatedly. Being scared and confused, I stupidly backed up into a lamp, causing it to fall over and break. The thump stopped, and with thinking I ran back toward my room. Foolishly, I turned around and saw one of those things slowly walking after me. As I got to my room, I slammed it shut and placed my dresser in front of it. A voice came from behind the door as scraping came from the other side of my door. "Come out, honey, we aren't going to hurt you. We love you." A twisted demonic tone came from the other side. As the scraping and banging continued, I came up with a half-assed plan. I grabbed a textbook from my bookshelf and with all my might I chucked it out the window. As the door began to move, I quickly hid under my bed. The door swung open with such force it bounced off the wall. As they walked into the room, my heart started pounding fast. "He cannot escape here, he knows too much." As I heard them talking, I quickly moved from under the bed and ran toward the door. As they realized what had happened, I already slammed the door shut and locked them in. Without any hesitation, I ran. And I ran hard. Even when I bursted through the front door, I kept running. All I could hear was distant screams and my harsh breathing. I kept running toward the woods and didn't look back at my former home. After 4 minutes of running, I finally stopped to catch my breath. I could see my house from a distance, but I could make out two figures moving toward the woods. As I pushed myself to keep running, I could still hear faint screams from the house. As it started raining, the wind became strong and harsh. I couldn't do anything but sob. As I walked onto the road, I followed it for God knows how long. The cold rain hitting my skin as the sky grew darker, sirens blared in the distance, then it became quiet. The harsh winds blew through my hair as I shivered through the cold winds. As I was about to give up, I saw bright lights in the distance. A truck sign flashed bright as multiple trucks pulled in. A small relief came over me as I started running toward the truck stop. Tripping over myself multiple times, I kept running. I felt more and more relieved as I got closer. "I'm finally free." I cried tears of joy as the truck stop became more clear. My legs and feet hurt from running too much, but I didn't care. All I wanted was to get far away from here. My body wanted to give in and collapse, but my heart wouldn't allow me to. As I ran into the parking lot, I stumbled toward one of the trucks at the pumping station. A man with a red plaid shirt and a dusty red trucker's hat stood pumping gas into his truck. I stumbled toward him, still in shock of what had just happened to me about 30 minutes ago. As he noticed me stumbling toward him, he slowly started backing up and reached slowly into his waistband. "Please, I need help." I struggled to speak as I tried catching my breath. The man slowly approached me as he tried calming me down. His dirty blonde hair slicked back by the trucker hat. "Hey, buddy, let's just calm down and let's talk. What happened to you?" His voice was soft and reassuring. It almost made me forget everything that just happened. As he got closer, I begged and pleaded with him that we should get far away from here. His calm demeanor changed as he saw the fear on my face. "We can't stay here. They're coming after me. Please," I said while terror filled my voice. My body started shaking uncontrollably as the images played in my head over and over. He placed his hands on my shoulders and looked me in my eyes. His grip tightened a little as he cleared his throat. "Listen to me. I cannot help you if you don't tell me what's going on. So tell me." His voice was a little more strict and his eyes were dead and cold. "My parents. They killed someone and I think I'm next." I stumbled and slurred over my words as I tried calming myself down. "Here, tell you what. I'll take you down to the police department and you can tell them. That sounds good? He said while walking toward the driver's door. I slowly nodded as he motioned for me to enter his truck. I hesitated for a split second but climbed in as I realized what my parents are capable of. As we drove away, for most of the drive I was quiet. I couldn't talk right without stumbling or stuttering over my words. But as he drove I felt like I was being watched. So, do you feel a little better now? He asked while taking his eyes off the road for a second to look over my direction. I slowly nodded my head as I stared out the truck window. Well, let me introduce myself. I'm Keith. Keith Harper. And if you don't mind, I would like to know your name. Kelvin. My name is Kelvin. I muttered out as I looked back at the window. I didn't feel like talking but I didn't want to be rude. If you don't mind, can you tell me everything that happened if that's okay with you? His voice returned to the soft reassuring voice from earlier. As I explained to him everything that happened to me over the past 9 years, his face changed from calm to shocked and scared. Right before he could speak, multiple loud popping noises came from behind us and not long after metal scraping was all that was left. Keith pulled the truck over and reached for the door handle. As he was getting out, I panicked and grabbed his arm. Wait. Don't leave me in here by myself. Please. I begged him. As he heard the fear in my voice he cleared his throat once again. Calm down, son. It's not gonna take. Before he could finish his sentence he was pulled from the door and loud screams and noises of flesh being ripped apart echoed through the night. I froze. My body tensed up. I couldn't do anything about it. His screams for help were cut off by loud chops. Without a split second I reached over and slammed the door and sat in the driver's seat. As I sat in the seat, a hand slammed against the window almost shattering it instantly. As I looked at the window, my blood went cold. It was my mother, but it was her in her human skin. Please. Honey, it's not safe for you out here. Come home, we miss you. Her voice was sympathetic and genuine. I wanted to believe that but I couldn't. As I shook my head no over and over, she began to sob uncontrollably. No. Get the hell away from me, you damn freak, you're not my parents, I yelled at her as I tried staring the engine but every time it would sputter and die. Her sobs were soon cut off by a loud growl. As I looked over toward her, all I could see in her face were hatred and rage. Her once light blue eyes turned red as she bashed the truck window with her sharp claws. I tried the engine over and over but it kept sputtering. As I looked over toward the passenger side, I saw the door being bashed and ripped from its hinges. As the passenger door was ripped completely off, a bigger humanoid started climbing in. As I turned the key in the ignition the engine came to life and I slammed my foot on the gas pedal. My father tried climbing in but slipped off the truck after I started driving faster. But as I looked over, my mother was still hanging onto the door. As she slammed her claws against the window over and over, she busted the window and shards of glass flew at my face. As the glass hit my left eye, I lost control of the truck and crashed it into some trees on the side of the road. As I woke up, I could see nothing but smoke filling the inside of the truck. I gathered up all the strength I had and pushed the door open and fell out. I tried standing but I immediately fell over in pain. I looked down at my leg and saw a big deep gash on my right leg. As I slowly braced myself against the truck, I started limping away toward the nearest public road I could find. The burning sensation from my leg only got worse as I continued bleeding. As I limped away, I heard heavy footsteps and I looked back at the wreckage to see a black humanoid creature following behind me. Half of her face was exposed while the other half had cuts. I tripped onto the ground clenching my leg in pain. I tried crawling away. I was stopped and grabbed by my leg. As I turned over, my mother was standing over me with her blood-covered claw in the air. As I cried, I closed my eyes tight and awaited my end. Sirens from the distance filled the sky as it started getting louder by the minute. As I held my eyes shut, I felt something softly press against my forehead. As I opened my right eye, it's my mother, and she gave me a kiss on my forehead and wrapped her arms around me. I'm sorry, honey. I just didn't want to lose you. I love you very much. Her voice was soft like how I remembered it as a child. I slowly wrapped my arms around her bony body and gave her a hug. As the sirens got closer, she stood up and faced the way they were coming from. As the cars pulled up, it got harder to keep my eyes open and eventually my eyes were closed. All I could hear was screaming, multiple gunshots, and slicing. I tried to crawl away but I couldn't. After what felt like an entirety the noises stopped. All I could hear was footsteps approaching me. I felt like I was being picked up and carried somewhere. I don't even want to know where. I just want to forget this ever happened. I want this to end. I'll never let curiosity come over me again.